Hello everyone, Ace here, and today let's talk about the absolute state of modern AAA gaming, as has been highlighted via comparisons of the recently released Avowed to significantly older games such as Elder Scrolls Skyrim and Elder Scrolls Oblivion, games from 2011 and 2006 respectively. These comparisons haven't exactly been kind to Avowed due to gameplay features that are simply missing in Avowed that were present in both Oblivion and Skyrim, like NPCs having set schedules, rather than standing around the exact same spot like a statue, or NPCs being able to have actual conversations that aren't 100% scripted as seen in Avowed, or having actual consequences for the player for trying to steal things out in the open, or lockpicking being more than just watch a bar go up, or even smaller features such as arrows bouncing off of stone rather than sticking into stone. Now, Avowed is the newest example of this sort of situation, where a newer game is released with notably missing features that have been present for decades, but it's far from the only recent example in AAA games. And there is another variation of this sort of situation as well, that being developers announcing something as somehow being a new feature that has in reality been within the industry for decades as well. Consider the upcoming Assassin's Creed Shadows, which was announced not too long ago to include destructible terrain. Destructible terrain that just simply isn't really all of that impressive. In fact, compare it, if you will, to the likes of Battletech's Global Assault from 1999, a tank game where you can blow up Parliament with a nuke. Or how about, as another example, Tiberian Sun, also from 1999, which had deformable terrain in which explosions could cause craters and legitimately impact your gameplay, meaning that you couldn't build in certain areas because it's just been so heavily cratered that the terrain is simply too uneven. And keep in mind, those are just two examples of games from 1999 that had more impressive destructible terrain than what Assassin's Creed Shadows has to offer by comparison. Now yes, those are different genres of games, yet the underlying issue still stands, and you can find examples from other games within the sandbox genre, the same genre that Assassin's Creed Shadows is a part of, that offer superior amounts of destructible terrain to Assassin's Creed Shadows, and are decades older. These kinds of examples of cut corners, or in some cases the bringing back of features that are implemented in an inferior way to games that are a decade older, are ultimately examples of just how bad things truly are within the AAA side of the industry. But of course, chances are, if you're watching this video, then you already knew that. The AAA part of the industry has been largely stagnant for over a decade at this stage. It is in fact reasonable to say that for the most part it never really fully recovered from the Great Recession, as most of the major innovations within the video game industry came from the indie side of the market ever since. Yet even within that context, the AAA side of the industry has been noticeably performing worse and worse these past several years in relation to how things were in, say, the early 2010s. Now, part of that, it is reasonable to say, came as a result of what happened in 2020, but just as important a part has got to be the infiltration of woke activists within the industry as well, as this particular decline was noticeable for years before 2020 itself. And there are two very distinct ways in which wokeness made everything worse. The first was the prioritization of pushing political ideology over all other factors, be they storytelling, polish, or gameplay. A good example of this in practice would be the Saints Row remake, which deliberately cut out the player's ability to perform certain missions in the game, or at least greatly censor the player's participation in what exactly they were engaging in, specifically because it would be politically inconvenient to include such features. Or another classic example would be adding in politically correct characters that the player is simply not allowed to treat negatively in any way whatsoever, to the tune of not even being allowed to say mean things to that character, regardless of how well it is truly warranted. This is especially noteworthy in games that are supposed to emphasize player choice and player freedom, so the explicit lack of player freedom is in that situation very telling. So that's the first way in which wokeness makes everything worse. The second way has to deal with the hiring practices. Simply put, the pro-discrimination hiring practices of wokeness, to the tune of discriminating against people via their skin color, their sex, or their sexual preferences, or even their religion, is on a moral sense utterly beyond the pale. But in a pragmatic sense, it also means not hiring the person that is most suited for the job, regardless of what religion they believe, who they have sex with, or what they physically look like. Yet wokeness takes this even a step further by only really promoting people that also happen to have the exact same political opinions. There are few things that woke activists hate more than black people that hold the wrong opinion, for example. Just look at how they treat Clarence Thomas. And so the end result is a bit of a feedback loop, where you have increasingly less competent people who are ideologically driven to produce games that do not prioritize gameplay or storytelling or anything that players actually care about, and instead will happily sacrifice those elements in the name of the message. With that context in mind, it is absolutely no wonder that the AAA game industry is in the state that it's currently in. And to be brutally honest, it's also no surprise why so many gamers are looking forward to the absolute collapse of the AAA gaming industry. Now yes, at this stage there is absolutely a bit of catharsis to the idea that the woke activists who have never had to work an actual day in their lives can all end up starving to death in the streets like they deserve. And I should mention that eventuality would provide far more entertainment and service to humanity than these activists could ever hope to provide otherwise. There is, however, a far larger and far more pragmatic reason to want to see the AAA part of the video games industry collapse, and that being that we can simply replace them then with something else. An industry that is far more practical and pragmatic. An industry that actually cares about providing good games to gamers. Sometimes it is simply required to remove the dead wood and start anew. And considering the state that the AAA part of the industry is in, there is a very compelling case to be made that we are at that point. And even outside of that, there are additional potential perks, such as the fact that major publishers have been letting some of their IPs gather dust for decades, that gamers do in fact want to see return, as evidenced in part by a significant portion of the indie industry essentially being spiritual successors to classics from the 90s and the 2000s. And this is of course even before getting into the whole remaster and remake portion of the industry, which has also become a massive part of the video game industry in no small part due to the negligence of the AAA side of things. Yes, things are absolutely on the decline, but it is also a golden opportunity to accelerate that decline and replace it with something better. The fastest way to do that would of course be to not buy games that are simply failing to meet the mark. Games such as, for example, Avowed, or indeed the upcoming Assassin's Creed Shadows. And not buying bad games is of course a very easy ask to make, and one that will result in a better tomorrow. But in any case, this has been Ace. Hope to see you guys again soon. Take care. Ace out.